If I were to name something that most college football fans probably don't remember, I would name the fact that Purdue went 9-4 in 2021. It was Jeff Brom's best year by a mile. Purdue beat two top three teams. They went on the road and beat number 2 Iowa, and at home they hosted number 3 Michigan State and beat them as well. Of course, Michigan State and Iowa ended the year outside of the top 3, and Michigan State barely inside the top 10, Iowa almost unranked, but they were still very good teams. Michigan State looked like they were on the path to possibly reaching the playoff. Iowa, same thing, and Purdue snatched away their playoff hopes. And from there, those two teams went on to lose more games. Purdue was the first loss for both of those amazing teams. And we've seen this before from Jeff Brom, 2018 versus Ohio State being the main example. But Purdue seemingly had somewhat of a breakthrough year last year. They went 8-4 in conference. They, again, like I said, beat two teams ranked in the top 3. They competed with the likes of Notre Dame, who was ranked 12th at the time they played them. Notre Dame finished in the top 10. And they got blown out by Ohio State. Ohio State obviously remembering that 2018 game and not wanting a repeat. But they still scored some points and for a quarter were competitive in one of the hardest places to play in the nation, in Ohio Stadium. They beat Tennessee in their bowl game without George Karlaftis and David Bell, their two best players, which just showed the depth, level of preparation, and coaching by Jeff Brom and his staff. They crushed rival Indiana. They beat Northwestern. They beat Nebraska on the road. Their only 4 losses were to Wisconsin, Notre Dame, Ohio State, and Minnesota. Took me a while to find that, partially because I didn't remember that Minnesota only beat Purdue by 7, but all of those losses were to teams with 9 wins or more. 2 of them were to teams that finished the year in the top 10, and there are arguments for Minnesota and Wisconsin. There are arguments that they should have been in the top 25 at the end of the year, and both of them received votes in the final polls. So Purdue, they had a fantastic year, but the question is, can it get better? I look at Purdue's schedule this year, and this is where we're going to start off, I think, and I see the potential for Purdue to have an even better year. Despite the departure of star wide receiver David Bell and defensive end George Karlaftis, Purdue returns a ton of production. I was reading on Athlon Sports yesterday, and I think they returned at the time of writing that article. Since the writing of that article, Milton Wright was declared academically ineligible. I think they had around 16 returning starters on both offense and defense. Of course, a lot of their key players departed, but you return the starting quarterback, which is the most important thing by a mile, I would say, especially in Jeff Brom's more pass-heavy offense. Remembering the game against Michigan State, where Purdue, to burn the clock, they just wouldn't stop passing. They weren't trying to run it. They just passed it with Aidan O'Connell. And it was the same thing in the Iowa game. Purdue just kept passing, and they butchered. Granted, Iowa's secondary had injuries, but they butchered one of the better secondaries and better coached defenses in the nation. They just took them apart. But all in all, you return Aidan O'Connell, return a lot of production, and Purdue, who I do have in my top 25, opens up the year facing Penn State, which is a night game at home, which I think is going to be a win for the Boilermakers, and if not, it is certainly going to be a close game. It's a night game. We know how Purdue does at home versus opponents who are viewed as more big time, and I think Purdue just is the better team, whether it's because I think they have the better head coach, they at least have the better game manager in the head coach. James Franklin is one of the worst game managers in the country, and not only that, but Purdue they have more experience, and I think that their offense is ran better. They also have more staff continuity, by what I understand, as Penn State's defensive coordinator Brent Pry departed the program. Purdue, after the Penn State game, then plays Indiana State. They travel on the road to Syracuse and play for Florida Atlantic. All of those teams are far worse than Penn State is. I expect nonetheless, or nothing less than Purdue to beat at least those three teams. Purdue's first road conference test is at Minnesota, which I think will be Purdue's first loss of the season. Minnesota also returns a ton of production. Minnesota has the better offensive line, the better running back room, and no, they don't have the better quarterback or better wide receivers or better tight ends, but they do have talent at those positions, and with Kirk Shiraka returning as their offensive coordinator, I expect Minnesota to have one of the Big Ten's at least better offenses, and by that I mean in the top half of the Big Ten in offense. Minnesota's defense, while they don't have a solid front seven, they have, I think, one of the better, if not the best, secondary in the Big Ten, which matches up well with Purdue's heavy pass game. Combine that with being on the road, I think this will be Purdue's first loss of the season. Purdue, I think, will then travel to Maryland. I don't think that. I have the schedule right in front of me. They do travel to Maryland. And here would be a battle of two pass-heavy teams. Purdue, at the end of the day, has the far better defense. Their defense was sneaky good last year, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. But they only allowed 22.4 points per game, which was 34th in the country. Their offense, on the other hand, despite the fact that it was good and toward the end of the year it showed flashes of being a great, maybe even elite passing offense, at least with David Bell in there and Aidan O'Connell. They only scored 29.1 points per game. They had a lot of struggles early on, and against teams like Minnesota and Wisconsin, who had solid defenses, combined with the fact that Aidan O'Connell occasionally has turnover-heavy games, that severely limited Purdue's points per game statistically. I think that Purdue will beat Maryland because of the superior defense and overall a passing offense that is comparable to Maryland's. The defense will win Purdue the game, I think. Purdue then hosts Nebraska. This series between the two teams has been competitive. Purdue won last year by 5. Nebraska dominated the previous year in West Lafayette, and I think Nebraska will win this game. And I think that Nebraska, they have a wide range of outcomes, but I'm very high on them. I'm also pretty high on Purdue. This would be a close game, probably more of a shootout than a defensive battle. I think at the end of the day, though, Nebraska's upgrades at staff will better utilize Nebraska's superior raw talent. Nebraska will also have better special teams and will have the better defense, specifically the better pass rush, which will help somewhat limit Aidan O'Connell in that deadly passing game. And finally, Purdue will have their third, and that's going to be their last loss of the year, playing at Wisconsin. Wisconsin, I think, will just have the defense to shut Purdue down here. And then after that, Purdue hosts Iowa, plays at Illinois, hosts Northwestern, and plays at Indiana. Purdue has had Iowa's number. Yes, Iowa has a very good defense and a good pass defense, but Iowa's offense is one of the worst in the entire Big Ten. I don't trust Spencer Petras, and even have some questions about their O-line with Tyler Linderbaum leaving. But outside of the offensive line and tight end, there is not a whole lot of skill at wide receiver or running back or at quarterback for Iowa, and it's a home game. I think Purdue would win this in a close one. At Illinois could be tricky, but I think that with how much Illinois loses, they had the most super seniors in the Big Ten this past season, lost all of them, and here is Purdue returning tons of production, has the better offense, has more talent, probably will have the better defense too. I think Purdue would go on the road and beat Illinois. And finally, hosting Northwestern, playing at Indiana. Those two are the worst teams in the Big Ten in my opinion, which would lead Purdue to a 9-3, 6-3 record. And I spent more time on just talking about this schedule than other teams because for Purdue to go 9-3 is different than, let's say, even Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, or most other teams going 9-3. Purdue has not seen 9 regular season wins since the basketball on grass era. His name escapes me. Really good head coach. Went to the Rose Bowl, so pardon me for forgetting his name. But the offense was called basketball on grass. early adopter of the spread offense. I'll remember his name in a few seconds and I'll blurt it back out. But anyway, it would be amazing for Purdue to win 9 games in the regular season. And if they win 9 games in the regular season, and I think they could possibly win 10, well, that would be very unlikely. They could maybe get a spot in Indy and play for their potentially first Big Ten championship since since the 2000s, really. Again, Joe Tiller's his name. Since the Joe Tiller era, Purdue could have their first chance at playing for a Big Ten championship. So, is this Jeff Brom's year? Does this team build off of this past season, or do they not? Really, we already went over the schedule, so I'm not going to continue to bore you with that, but they avoided the 3 best Big Ten East teams. Did you not notice? In my opinion, Ohio State, Michigan, and Michigan State are the teams to be most scared of in the East. That's just my opinion. All 3 are ranked in my top 20, and Michigan and Ohio State are ranked in my personal top 4. So Purdue avoiding those 3 teams is critical, because playing at Michigan State, playing at Michigan, playing at Ohio State, I'm just going to assume like the worst possible outcomes of facing those teams, is a whole different ball game than hosting Penn State, who is 11-11 in their past 2 seasons, who does not have a great quarterback, who just put out a ton of production in the NFL, lost a lot of starters, and still went 7-6. Whole different ball game. Purdue gets Penn State, Maryland, and rival Indiana from the East. You could not have... It would be harder to ask for a better non-conference draw, because I have Indiana being the 7th best team in the East, so the worst, Maryland being the 5th best team, and Penn State, even though I have them ahead of Michigan State in conference play due to a tiebreaker, I think Michigan State's the better team, and Penn State will only beat them because of home field advantage. So in reality, Penn State's the middle-of-the-road 4th best Big Ten East team, and that's what Purdue draws, and that certainly boosts their chances of getting 9-10 wins, which puts them in that West Division contender spot. Also, Jeff Brom plans well against top 10 opponents. We already talked about this, but Ohio State in 2018, Michigan State and Iowa this year, and the Ohio State game this year, I mean, yeah, Ohio State just blew them out. There was no question about that, but what could you have asked Purdue to do more? Ohio State was obviously reminding themselves about that 2018 victory, and it was in Columbus, and they just have so much more raw talent. I mean, the fact that Purdue was competitive for a few minutes and stayed in there for the first quarter was really, it's not saying moral victories are good, but it's not like he went in there and lost 56-0, which I can imagine a lot of coaches would have done if they coached Purdue and went into the snake pit that is the horseshoe. And also, he played competitively against Notre Dame, who we already talked about, finished in the top 10. He knows how to play to his to opposing talent. He knows how to raise his team well, prepare. I think he's one of the better play callers in the country. Him and his brother, Brian Brom, really great duo off the field and on the field as coaches. A lot of respect for them. So that's another factor. I mean, he was coming in this year arguably on the hot seat, Jeff Brom was. I think he's safely off of it. And also, didn't really mention this, but it ties in with him being a head coach. They have brought in some portal additions. Most notably, they have brought in Tyrone Tracy from Iowa, and I hear that they also might be bringing in Charlie Jones, though nothing has been confirmed yet from what I have heard. But still, they're using the portal. He's doing well. He's doing good enough in recruiting to identify players who can work in his offense, and the defense is improving too. I mean, coaching, Purdue is a really good, underrated coaching staff. The offense will also continue to take steps forward. Listen, they lost David Bell, and Milton Wright has been declared ineligible, but they returned both of their tight ends, Payne Durham, Garrett Miller. They return Aidan O'Connell. They return King Dure. They return a lot of their offensive line. They return much of their defense as well. And I think that, defense I didn't really mention here, but the offense, Purdue just finds guys. Was David Bell was he a known player 2 years ago? Was he? I don't think so. They just find guys. They know how to produce wide receivers. Quarterback, you went from David Blau, who's a pretty solid QB given the supporting cast he had at Purdue, and you had Jack Plummer, who was serviceable, and now you get to walk on Aidan O'Connell, who is the second best quarterback in the nation. The offense it doesn't reload in the same way that Ohio State's or Alabama's does, but you just know, it's almost a given now, that Purdue will find great players on offense, whether they're recruited with no stars, 2 stars, 3 stars, 4 stars, etc. And they do return 14 starters here. I had this on the list. I just didn't remember it earlier in the video because it's on this slide. But they return 14 starters. This is after Milton Wright has been declared academically ineligible, which hurts, but I also think if Charlie Jones to Purdue, it turns out to be true, and that's the rumor that's going around right now, you'll upgrade at return man, big time. And Charlie Jones had over 300 receiving yards last year. I think he had 3 receiving touchdowns as well. So he can be a receiver, and he can sure as crap return touchdowns, whether it's from returning them from punts or returning them from kickoffs. He's a good player with Purdue's coaching and the fact that their offense is more pass heavy. He might become an X-factor wide receiver / returnman. He could be the next Purdue wide receiver. First it was Rondale Moore, then David Bell. With his return ability, the X-factor part there on special teams, he won't need to be as great as a receiver as David Bell or Rondale Moore to become a known and sought-after commodity because of his return game that gives him... his return game's amazing. There's a reason he was the Big Ten returnman of the year. But the Boilermakers returned 14 starters all around, so team chemistry is a known. It's going to be good. You're going to see some new faces, obviously, because the main players departed, being George Karlaftis, David Bell, Jackson Anthrop, and again, mentioned this already, seemingly thousands of times, but Milton Wright's not eligible. So you're going to see new players have to step up to the plate, but it's nice to see Aidan O'Connell, Payne Durham, others return and play their part once again in possibly what could be Purdue's best year since the Joe Tiller era. And finally, Purdue had a sneaky good defense in 2021. Sneaky good defense. Again, only allowing 22.4 points per game, which was 34th in the country. Their defense, on average, allowed only 208 passing yards and 159 rushing yards. So total, they allowed only 368.1 yards per game. And honestly, that's, for Purdue's standards and what Jeff Brom has been known for, that's good. The defense has improved, and Purdue is also, they have taken some attrition via the portal. They've also added some players through the portal on defense and all around their team. But with Ron English and that staff, I think that this defense is going to be one of the sneakier defenses. It's not going to have this big-time reputation where, it's a top 10, top 15, probably not even top 20 defense nationally. It's not going to be well-renowned or well-respected in the Big Ten. It's not going to be talked about. But that's why I say it's sneaky good, because it's not going to be talked about, but it is going to help Purdue win some of those games. Like I just mentioned the Maryland game. Maryland and Purdue are both pass-heavy offenses, and they're not just pass-heavy and that's what they want to be. They're great at being pass-heavy offenses, and at the end of the day, with how good their pass offenses are and the fact that Maryland honestly probably has the better wide receiver core, possibly the better O-line with all 5 of their offensive linemen returning, it will be up to Purdue's defense to win them that game, and I think Purdue's defense will win them that game. It's really all I have to say for this video. I think that Purdue will have a 9-3 regular season, 6-3 in conference. I think that Jeff Brom's coaching status is going to be, his stock is going to rise, and I think that Purdue could win the West. I think that Nebraska, Minnesota, and Purdue are the three main contenders for the Big Ten West. It's weird not hearing Wisconsin or Iowa there, but they both draw road games at Ohio State. Iowa draws a home game against Michigan, who I think is the second best team in the conference. Wisconsin has tough road games at Iowa, at Nebraska. Minnesota has finally figured out how to get Wisconsin's number sometimes. And the schedules, the returning production, the transfer portal, the staffs, all of these things I think point to Purdue, Minnesota, and Nebraska being your top three in the West. I have Nebraska winning the West, Minnesota finishing second, Purdue finishing third, but I could see Purdue winning the West too. And if Jeff Brom plays his cards right, which he certainly did last year, Purdue can possibly find itself in Indy. Thank you all for watching. If you're new to this channel, make sure to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts on this video and on Purdue football, your record prediction for them for 2022, down below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys around. Bye.